The silence was the first sign of trouble. In the world of Mr. Min, the formidable Korean mafia boss who commanded a sprawling empire from this very mansion, silence was not peace. It was a vacuum. A space where loyalty could curdle into betrayal, where a rival's blade could be sharpening. Tonight, that silence was different. It was broken. A sound, faint and furtive, from the direction of the kitchens. A rustle. A soft, metallic click that did not belong to the measured, ghostly movements of his night staff. Mr. Min sat upright in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. His office, a stark cathedral of black marble and smoked glass, overlooked the sleeping city, but his attention was now entirely inside. His mind, a cold and efficient calculator of threats, cycled through the possibilities. A rival syndicate testing his defenses. A disgruntled subordinate looking for leverage. An assassin. Any other night, the response would be swift, brutal, and final. His hand instinctively moved toward the custom-fitted drawer in his desk where a sleek, black pistol waited patiently. But he paused. This sound was wrong. It lacked the confidence of a professional killer, the arrogance of a rival. It was small. He rose, his tall frame clad in an impeccable black suit and crisp white shirt, a uniform of power. He moved without a sound, a predator in his own domain. The long, echoing hallways were lined with priceless art he never looked at and watched by cameras he always felt. Every polished surface reflected a man whose face was a mask of disciplined neutrality, a face known and feared in every dark corner of the city. He was a man who dealt in outcomes, not emotions. Profit, power, and the elimination of threats. That was the simple, brutal trinity that governed his life. As he neared the kitchen, the source of the sound became clearer. It was coming from the walk-in pantry, a steel-doored vault of culinary treasures. He had expected a threat. He was prepared for violence. What he found when he swung the heavy door open left him momentarily frozen.
It was not an assassin.
It was Amara, one of his maids, a young, beautiful African-American woman who was usually just a blur of a light blue uniform in his peripheral vision. She was huddled on the floor, back to him, cramming leftover scraps of food from the evening's lavish dinner into her mouth with a desperate, trembling hand. At the sound of the door, she flinched, a small, wounded cry escaping her lips. She turned, her eyes wide with sheer terror, her face illuminated by the cold, sterile light of the pantry. She looked like a cornered animal, expecting a blow. Mr. Min said nothing. He simply stood there, an imposing silhouette in the doorway, his shadow falling over her. The air crackled with her fear and his unnerving stillness. This was not a problem he could solve with a bullet. This was something else entirely. And what this powerful mafia boss did next would not just surprise her, it would shatter the foundations of the world he had so meticulously built. Everything was about to change. Mr. Min's mansion was less a home and more a fortress of absolute order. Every single object, from the $1,000 orchids to the sterling silver cutlery, had its designated place. His staff operated under a similar principle. They were to be efficient, silent, and above all, invisible. They were components in a machine, and he was the ghost within it. Amara's presence on the pantry floor was a catastrophic system failure. It was a messy, human variable in an equation he had perfected over years of ruthless discipline. He was a mafia boss who had risen through the ranks not with wild aggression, but with chilling precision. He had dismantled his enemies piece by piece, financially and physically, until they simply ceased to exist. Mercy was a word he read in books, a weakness he exploited in others. It had no function in his world. Yet he did not call for his guards. He did not unleash the cold fury that had made hardened men weep. Instead, he simply watched her. He took in the scene with the same detached analysis he would apply to a rival's balance sheet. He saw the worn-down heels of her simple black shoes, a stark blemish against the pristine white marble of the floor. He saw the way her fingers, raw and chapped from cleaning chemicals, shook as she clutched a piece of half-eaten bread. He saw the profound shame and terror warring in her eyes. This was not defiance. It was not theft born of greed. This was survival. A kind of primal desperation he hadn't witnessed up close since his own brutal childhood on the streets of Seoul, a life he had buried under mountains of money and power. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. For Amara, it was an eternity of judgment. For Mr. Min, it was a moment of profound and unwelcome reflection. He had built an empire to insulate himself from this very feeling, this raw, gnawing hunger, this soul-crushing helplessness. And here it was, kneeling on his floor, wearing his uniform. His first instinct was to erase the problem. Fire her. Have her removed. Restore the sterile perfection of his environment. But another, unfamiliar impulse stayed his hand. It was a flicker of something he couldn't name. Curiosity? Or perhaps the ghost of a memory, the echo of a boy who once knew what it was to starve. He finally broke the silence, his voice low and devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the storm of fear radiating from her. Why? It was a simple question, but in this house, from this man, it was as heavy as a death sentence. He wasn't asking for an excuse. He was demanding a truth, and he was a man who always got what he demanded. Amara's lips trembled, but no words came out. How could she explain? How could she make this powerful, terrifying man understand the crushing weight of a life lived on the knife's edge of poverty? To him, the food she was eating was garbage, the discarded remnants of a feast he wouldn't even remember. To her, it was a desperate measure to quiet the gnawing ache in her stomach, so she could make it through another 16-hour day. She expected him to shout, to drag her out, to make an example of her. The quiet, analytical way he was looking at her was somehow worse. It was as if he were dissecting her, stripping away her dignity layer by layer. She finally found her voice, a ragged whisper. "I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." Please, the plea hung in the cold air, pathetic and small. Mr. Min's expression didn't change. He was a Korean Mafia boss who had built his reputation on an almost supernatural ability to read people, to find the cracks in their armor. He could see that her fear was real, but it was incomplete. There was something else behind it, something she was protecting even more fiercely than herself. He took a step into the pantry, the door swinging slowly shut behind him, plunging them into a more intimate, claustrophobic space. The only light now came from the single, bare bulb overhead. He lowered his voice even further, a strategic move designed to disarm. "That is not what I asked. I asked why." He then noticed it. A small, makeshift bundle on the floor behind her, wrapped in a dish towel. It was more food. Not half-eaten scraps, but carefully selected pieces, a whole bread roll, a piece of chicken, and apple. Food saved, not scavenged. Food for someone else. Before he could ask, a tiny sound from the shadows behind a stack of flour sacks made them both freeze. A sniffle. A child's sniffle. Amara's eyes shot toward the sound, her terror instantly replaced by a fierce, protective panic. Everything snapped into focus for Mr. Min. The desperation, the saved food, the lie behind her fear. From behind the sacks, a small boy, no older than 6, peeked out. He was a miniature version of his mother, with the same wide, expressive eyes, now filled with tears. He was holding a small, worn toy car. "Mama," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm still hungry." The truth hit Mr. Min with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't stealing for herself. She had smuggled her son into this fortress, this den of wolves, because she had nowhere else to leave him, and he was hungry. She was risking everything, not for herself, but for her child. This wasn't just a system failure anymore. This was a revelation. A moment that cleaved his life into a before and an after. The boy's soft voice echoed in the small space, a sound of pure innocence in a place that had none. Amara rushed to her son, wrapping him in her arms, trying to shield him from the cold, imposing figure of the Mafia boss who now held their fate in his hands. She was whispering to him, "It's okay, Sam. It's okay," but her own body was trembling uncontrollably. For Mr. Min, the world tilted on its axis. He had spent his adult life surrounded by men who would sell their own families for a fraction of his power. Loyalty was a commodity, bought and paid for. Love was a weakness to be exploited. But this was different. This was a mother's fierce, desperate love, a force of nature that had breached the impenetrable walls of his life. He saw his entire empire, his wealth, his power, reflected in the tear-filled eyes of a hungry child, and for the first time in a long time, he felt its hollowness. Just as this fragile, impossible moment hung suspended in time, a new sound shattered it. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps approaching down the marble hall.
Boots.
The distinct, authoritative tread of Kwon, his head of security. A man utterly loyal, ruthlessly efficient, and entirely without sentiment. Kwon's job was to eliminate irregularities. A hidden child in the mansion's pantry was the very definition of an irregularity. Discovery was imminent. Amara's face went white with a new, more immediate terror. If Kwon found them, there would be no quiet dismissal. There would be questions. There would be consequences. She would be seen as a security risk, a spy, a threat. And in Mr. Min's world, threats were neutralized. Without a word, without a moment of hesitation, Mr. Min moved. He stepped back out of the pantry, positioning his large frame to completely block the doorway. He pulled the heavy steel door until it was almost closed, leaving only a sliver of an opening, plunging Amara and Sam into near darkness. It was a decisive, protective act, an instinct he didn't know he possessed. Kwon rounded the corner, his hand resting on the holstered firearm at his side. "Sir? Is everything all right?" I heard a noise. His eyes scanned the hallway, sharp and suspicious. He glanced toward the pantry door, his gaze lingering. Mr. Min didn't flinch. He met his guard's gaze with an icy calm that permitted no further questions. "I was getting a bottle of water," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. "Your ears are playing tricks on you. Return to your post." Kwon hesitated for a fraction of a second, his training warring with his boss's absolute authority. But no one questioned Mr. Min. No one. "Yes, sir," he said, giving a slight bow before turning and resuming his patrol, his footsteps receding down the hall. Mr. Min stood there until the sound faded completely, his back to the pantry, a silent, unmovable guardian. He had just lied to his most trusted man. He had just protected a secret that was not his own. He, the great Korean Mafia boss, had just chosen mercy over order. The beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning? He wasn't sure. He only knew that he had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The following morning, a heavy, unspoken tension permeated the mansion. The staff whispered amongst themselves, sensing a shift in the oppressive atmosphere. Amara worked with a quiet, terrified diligence, expecting a summons to Mr. Min's office at any moment, the formal precursor to her dismissal and ruin. She had spent the rest of the night huddled with Sam in her small, sterile room in the staff quarters, her mind racing, praying for a miracle she didn't believe in. The summons came mid-morning, but it was not to his office. A different guard, one she didn't know, instructed her to meet Mr. Min in the main kitchen. The scene of the crime. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she walked, each step an act of will. She entered the vast, stainless steel kitchen to find him standing by the large central island, dressed in another severe black suit. He was alone. He didn't look at her immediately, instead staring at a single, perfect apple he held in his hand. "You broke the rules of my house," he said, his voice calm, matter of fact. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Amara could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She braced herself for the inevitable. "I should have you removed," he continued, finally turning his gaze to her. His eyes were dark and unreadable. It would be the logical course of action. "You represent a security breach. A vulnerability." He paused, letting the clinical words hang in the air. "But logic failed to account for your son." He gestured to a stool at the island.
Seat.
"Tell me everything. Not excuses." The truth, it was a command, but it was also an opening. A crack of light in the suffocating darkness of her fear. And so, the story spilled out of her. It wasn't a dramatic, tear-soaked confession, but a quiet, dignified account of a life spent running just to stand still. She spoke of Sam's chronic asthma, the expensive medication that her meager salary could barely cover. She spoke of the second job she worked in the afternoons, cleaning offices, which meant she often had to leave Sam alone, a constant source of guilt and fear. She told him how she had been evicted from her last apartment after the rent was raised, forcing her to live in a shelter where she feared for her son's safety. Bringing him to the mansion was an act of final, desperate resort. She had no one else. No family, no safety net. Just a fierce determination to protect her child. "I know I did wrong, sir," she finished, her voice barely a whisper. "But he's all I have. When you're a person like Meets, people don't see you. You're just part of the furniture. Invisible. I just wanted him to be safe. And to not be hungry." Mr. Min listened without interruption, his expression unchanging. But inside, her words were dismantling the very structure of his world. Invisible. He had built his empire on the ability to make people disappear. He had never considered what it felt like to be invisible against your will, to be erased by circumstance. He had seen her as a component, a uniform. He had never truly seen her at all. For a long moment after she finished speaking, Mr. Min remained silent, processing the raw data of her life. The medical bills, the eviction, the crushing weight of a system designed to keep people like her trapped. He saw it not as a tragedy, but as a series of logistical problems, and his mind, honed for years on solving complex, often violent problems, began to work. He was a mafia boss. He didn't do pity. He did solutions. He walked over to a phone on the kitchen wall, a direct line to his personal assistant. He picked it up and began issuing a series of calm, precise commands, his voice a low, authoritative hum. "Get Dr. Choi on the line. Have him at the front gate in 20 minutes. He is to bring a full pediatric diagnostic kit." "Yes, here." At the house, he hung up and immediately dialed again. "Mr. Park, I need you to handle an employment contract review and a housing acquisition. There is a lease agreement to be terminated and a debt to be settled with a landlord named—" He paused, looking at Amara, who numbly provided the name of her former landlord. "Settle it. In full. Then, I want you to secure the deed for the 2-bedroom apartment at the corner of Oak and Elm. Unit 4B. Pay cash. Have the keys here by lunch. No, I don't care what it costs. It's a business expense." He hung up again. Amara stared at him, bewildered, a dawning sense of disbelief on her face. This couldn't be real. People like her didn't get solutions, they got eviction notices and collection calls. Mr. Min turned back to her, his expression as impassive as ever. "Dr. Choi is my personal physician.
He is the best.
He will examine your son and will oversee his care from now on. The cost is irrelevant." He paused. "Mr. Park is my lawyer. He will handle your housing. You and your son will move into the apartment this afternoon. It is close to a good school. You will no longer work a second job. Your salary here has been doubled, effective last month. The back pay will be in your account by the end of the day." He was restructuring her life with the same dispassionate efficiency he would use to take over a rival's shipping business. He saw the confusion and shock on her face and clarified, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This is not a gift, Tamara. This is a condition of your employment. You are a member of my household staff. Your well-being and that of your son is a logistical requirement for the smooth operation of this estate. A distracted employee is an inefficient employee. You will follow these orders." He had reframed an act of profound mercy as a cold, calculated business decision. It was the only way he knew how to do it. He was giving her a new life, not out of charity, but as a direct order from her boss. It was an astonishing, terrifying, and beautiful act of power. The arrival of the distinguished Dr. Choi, followed by the shark-like efficiency of Mr. Park the lawyer, sent shockwaves through the household staff. Whispers followed Amara as she led the doctor to her small room to see Sam. The other maids and cooks exchanged stunned, fearful glances. What was happening? Was she in trouble? Or was she something else now? The true spectacle, however, was yet to come. That evening, as the sun set, Mr. Min's senior lieutenants began to arrive for a scheduled dinner meeting. These were hard men, killers and strategists who formed the backbone of his criminal organization. They gathered in the cavernous main dining hall, a room of dark wood and glittering crystal, expecting to discuss territory disputes and new revenue streams. They took their seats around the long, polished table, an assembly of predators waiting for their leader. But when Mr. Min entered, he was not alone. He walked in with Amara at his side, and holding his hand, looking up at the world with a mixture of terror and wonder, was her son, Sam. A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air out of the room. The lieutenants froze, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief. This was their fearsome leader, the man who ordered executions with a subtle nod, and he was walking into a high-level meeting holding a small child's hand. Mr. Min ignored them all. He led Sam to the chair right beside his own, at the head of the table. He pulled it out for the boy, a gesture of courtesy so alien in this context that it was utterly jarring. He then looked at Amara. "You will dine with us," he stated, gesturing to the seat on his other side. Amara, dressed in a simple, clean dress provided for her, looked like she might faint. To sit at this table was unthinkable. It was a violation of every known rule. But the Korean Mafia boss's face was unreadable, his command absolute. She sat. One of the chefs, pale with anxiety, came out to serve the first course. He stopped, unsure of what to do. Mr. Min looked at him. "Serve the boy first," he ordered, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of iron. The chef, trembling slightly, placed a small plate of perfectly cooked fish and vegetables in front of Sam. Mr. Min then picked up the boy's fork and knife, cut the fish into small, manageable pieces, and pushed the plate gently toward him. He did this all under the stunned, silent gaze of his most dangerous men. For a full minute, the only sound was the soft clink of Sam's small fork against the porcelain plate. Then Mr. Min finally looked up, his dark eyes sweeping across the faces of his lieutenants. His expression was a cold, hard dare, a silent challenge. The message was unmistakable, delivered without a single word of explanation. "This woman and this child are with me. They are under my protection. They are untouchable. And if any of you has a problem with that, you have a problem with me." In that moment, he wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a king declaring his new royal line. And nobody, absolutely nobody, dared to speak a word. The dinner was the most surreal and tense meal any of the lieutenants had ever experienced. They tried to discuss business, their voices stilted and cautious, but the presence of the small, quiet boy at the head of the table changed the very air they breathed. Sam, oblivious to the lethal power dynamics swirling around him, ate his food with a simple, honest hunger. Every so often, he would look up at Mr. Min with wide, curious eyes, and the fearsome mafia boss would meet his gaze with a flicker of something unreadable. After that night, the mansion was irrevocably altered. The rigid, fearful hierarchy that had governed the staff began to dissolve, replaced by a new, more complex code. Amara was no longer just a maid. She was something more, something undefined. She still performed her duties, but now the other staff treated her with a mixture of awe and respectful distance. She was under the boss's personal protection, a status that made her more powerful than any of them. The biggest change, however, was in Mr. Min himself. He began to leave his office door open. Small, insignificant sounds that he once would have considered a distraction, the distant laughter of Sam playing in the garden, the soft hum of Amara singing as she worked, became part of the new silence of his home. He found himself watching the boy. He watched him learn to ride a bike on the long marble hallways, his initial fear turning to triumph and joy. He watched him chase butterflies in the meticulously manicured gardens, a small explosion of life in a place that had been sterile for so long. One afternoon, Mr. Min was in his office, reviewing surveillance reports of a rival operation, when Sam quietly entered. The boy didn't say a word, just walked up to the massive, imposing desk and placed a piece of paper on it. It was a drawing, done in bright, childish crayon. It depicted two figures. One was small, with a cheerful smile. The other was a very tall stick figure, dressed entirely in black, with a stern, straight line for a mouth. The two figures were holding hands. Sam pointed to the tall figure. "That's you," he said simply. "You're the king of the castle." Then he turned and ran out of the room, his job done. Mr. Min stared at the drawing for a long time. The king of the castle. For years, he had thought of himself that way. A ruler in a fortress of his own making. But the drawing showed him something else. He wasn't alone in the picture. The crude, colorful drawing was a mirror, reflecting a man he didn't recognize but was slowly, inexplicably becoming. He picked up the piece of paper, his touch surprisingly gentle, and slid it beneath a stack of confidential files, hiding the simple truth from a world that would never understand it. A year passed. The seasons changed, but the new reality within the walls of the mansion solidified into a strange and stable routine. From the outside, nothing had changed. Mr. Min was still the same feared and respected Korean Mafia boss. His business dealings were as ruthless and profitable as ever. His enemies still disappeared. But inside, the fortress had become a home. Sam, now 7, was a whirlwind of healthy, boisterous energy. His asthma was under control, his cheeks were full, and his laughter echoed in rooms that had only ever known whispered conversations and silent footsteps. He was no longer the timid, hungry child from the pantry. He was confident, bright, and utterly without fear of the powerful man who had become the center of his small world. He would often do his homework at the massive dining room table while Mr. Min sat at the head, conducting business over encrypted phone lines. The contrast was a daily spectacle, a feared criminal mastermind discussing smuggling routes and turf wars while simultaneously reminding a second grader to show his work on a math problem. Amara had blossomed. The constant weight of fear and desperation had lifted from her shoulders, replaced by a quiet, unshakable dignity. She oversaw the household with a gentle efficiency, her role having evolved from a simple maid to something more akin to a chatelaine. She was no longer invisible. She was the warm, beating heart of the house, and the entire staff, including the hardened security guards, treated her with a profound respect that bordered on reverence. They had all witnessed the transformation of their boss and understood that she was the catalyst. She and Mr. Min rarely spoke of what had happened, but a deep, unspoken understanding existed between them. It was a bond forged not in romance or friendship, but in a shared sense of responsibility for the boy who tied their disparate worlds together. One evening, Mr. Min found Amara in the garden, watching Sam chase fireflies as dusk settled. She turned to him, a soft smile on her face.
"He's happy," she said.
I never knew he could be this happy." Mr. Min watched his small charge, who had just managed to catch a blinking light in his cupped hands, his face alight with pure joy. "He is safe," Mr. Min replied, his voice low. That is all that matters. It was the closest he had ever come to admitting what he felt. Safety was the most valuable currency he possessed, the one thing his money and power could truly guarantee. And he had given it, all of it, to this woman and her child. The empire of fear he had built to protect himself now served a new, more profound purpose.
It was a shield for them.
The final piece of the transformation clicked into place on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Min had hired a private tutor for Sam, an elderly Korean woman with a gentle demeanor and a sharp mind, to teach the boy the language and customs of his own heritage. He would often sit in his office, the door ajar, listening to the soft cadence of their lessons. He found the familiar sounds of his native tongue, spoken with a child's stumbling accent, to be strangely comforting. On this particular day, they were working on vocabulary. The tutor, Mrs. Kim, pointed to a word in the textbook. "Gajak," she said clearly. "It means family." Sam tried to repeat it, his American accent tangling the vowels. "Gajak," he said, frowning in concentration. "Gajak," Mrs. Kim corrected gently. Mr. Min rose from his desk and walked to the doorway of the library where the lesson was taking place. He leaned against the frame, watching. "Let the tongue rest at the bottom of your mouth for the first syllable," he said, his own Korean perfect and precise. "Ka." Sam looked up, his face bright with surprise. He tried again. "Ka-jak." "Better," Mr. Min said with a nod. He then looked from the boy to Amara, who was standing nearby, quietly arranging books on a shelf. His gaze held hers for a long moment, an entire conversation passing between them without a single word. He then looked back at his tutor and his de facto son. "Good job," he said again. But this time, it was not a correction. It was not a language lesson.
It was a statement.
A definition. A declaration of fact. It was the final brick clicking into a wall he hadn't even realized he was building. Later that evening, he was alone in his office. The mansion was quiet. On his vast, empty desk of black marble, where the only objects were a phone and a lamp, sat one other item. It was the crayon drawing Sam had given him a year ago, now housed in a simple, elegant black frame. He picked it up, his thumb tracing the crude outline of the tall stick figure in the black suit. The king of the castle. He had built an empire on profit, power, and the elimination of threats. He had commanded loyalty through fear. But a boy's hunger and a mother's love had shown him a different kind of power, a different kind of strength. He placed the frame back on the desk, not off to the side, but in the very center, a place of honor. His world was still dangerous, and he was still a formidable and ruthless Korean mafia boss. But he now had something to protect that was more valuable than any territory or enterprise. He had a family, forged in the dark, in a moment of desperation, and now living in the light. And he would burn the entire world to the ground to keep them safe.